And today I'm going to be talking to you about written applications, so covering cover letters and also key selection criteria as well. So if you have any questions during the session, feel free to write any comments in the chat. And because I'm not sure if I'll be able to see your hands raised, so feel free to just write in the chat, and then at the end we'll actually have a chance to answer all your questions as well. So this is part of our Launch Your Career series. So you might have already attended some of our other sessions, but if you haven't yet, feel free to just check out our SharePoint, because we've covered a range of topics over the last couple of years, years, yes, but over the last couple of weeks as well. And, oh, sorry, I can't move my slide. Just a second. Right, okay. Moving now, all good. So before we get started, I wanted to do an acknowledgement of country. So Griffith University acknowledges the people who are the traditional custodians of the land, and just wanted to pay my respect to elders past, present, and extend this respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in the session today. So here are some learning outcomes for today's session. So we're going to learn about selection criteria and how to spot that in a job ad. Also different kinds of applications and key selection criteria documents. So cover letters, pitch letters, capability statement, suitability statement. They're really different words of saying the same thing. And we're also going to learn about how to effectively present your knowledge and experience as evidence, and gain an understanding of the structure, language, and content of professional cover letters and selection criteria. So what is selection criteria? So I guess some of you might have come across selection criteria before. So can I just get, people in the chat just to write yes or no if you've heard of what selection criteria is, for starters? Yes. Okay. Good. Good. Okay, Justin, good. Good to know. Great. All right, great. So I'll just give a bit of an overview of what it is. So you've probably seen, so it's basically forms part of the basis for an interview. So some companies will specifically request key selection criteria responses, and that tends to be government and related agencies and things like that. Might be universities, places like that. Also, selection criteria is kind of a broad word as well, that can just be the criteria that is required by the employer, and they might just require the key selection criteria to be addressed within a cover letter. So there's kind of those two sides of selection criteria. So typical application requirements. So an application typically says a current CV or a resume. So those words tend to be quite interchangeable. And also a cover letter is usually required. So usually, even if they don't specifically mention one, usually a cover letter is good to do if there's a spot to put it in. Here it says maximum 2 pages, but obviously that depends a lot on the job that you're applying for. So typically a cover letter would be 1 page, unless they otherwise say, address the key selection criteria within 2 pages, which would be more of a detailed format, which we're going to go through today as well. And this is a common question that a lot of students ask. So I guess, do you really need to do a cover letter if you've got a resume? And especially the students that have a really detailed resume. I guess my answer is, ideally, yes, because a cover letter is a way that you can actually stand out from other applicants, because you can explain what your motivations are, why you're applying, why you want that particular organisation, and why you want that particular job, which is often information that you can't really convey in a resume. So these are actually some quotes here. So, I guess the cover letter is as important as a resume. So the reason that we say that is because depending on the recruiter, we don't actually know what they're going to read first. So I've previously worked in recruitment, and I know some people that used, I guess their method was doing the cover letter first, and then personally I would actually check the resume first. So it's all about individual preferences. So I guess you just want to make sure that important information is on both documents, and ideally you do have both documents. So I guess if you take one thing away from today, it would be that. So I guess explaining as much as you can as to why you actually want the position as well, to make it a bit more personal than other applicants. The last one there, so what gets me reading a resume is a good cover letter. So is it short? Does it respond using the keywords? So that means, have you covered off everything that they've asked for within your letter? So that's really important as well. And I guess when I say, keeping it short, that I guess is, providing evidence of what you've done in the past, but also keeping it succinct enough so that employers are actually going to read it. Because I guess, you don't kind of want it really, really short, but you don't want it huge as well. So I guess it's finding that fine line between the two. And we can go through a bit of that further. And so thinking about the language, and I guess this is different language depending on the roles that you're applying for. So often, you want your application letter or your cover letter to actually complement your resume. So ideally, you don't want exactly the same words in exactly because employers are going to get a bit bored of reading exactly the same thing. So although both should include interesting and relevant points, think of different ways to explain it, I would say. Also in your key selection criteria, so always making sure that you address any of the attributes and things that they've indicated in their job ad that they're actually asking for. And if you do get to the point where you do need to make it more concise, making sure that you firstly take out anything that is not directly relevant or asked for within the job ad. And that's often one way you can do that. The other thing is sometimes they might ask for a capability or a suitability statement, which is often a brief selection criteria. So it might be addressing skills in a group. So sometimes they might ask for a 2-page cover letter where you address the key selection criteria. And sometimes they might even give you a word limit as well. So you might have seen like online applications. Sometimes they've got a spot for, 300 or 500 words, and you've got to make sure that you stick to that. I guess in those situations, I just probably firstly write them in a Word doc so that you can check your spelling, check how many words there is, and then copy and paste it over to the actual application form as well. So no need to panic. So I guess, when you're applying for jobs, as long as you kind of treat it a bit like an assignment. So think, it's a professional document. You want to make sure that you cover all the bases, you address the question. You'll be surprised the amount of applications that are sent through that don't actually address what is asked of them. And that's actually one of the most important things. And make sure that you read through thoroughly what is required and address everything that you do have. Try not to focus on what you don't have, because I guess we want to keep the application letter really positive and focus on the skills that you do have. And then when you are focusing on the skills that you do have, always providing the evidence of how you've acquired those skills. So I guess, if you wanted to explain that you've got communication skills, well, how did you actually acquire those communication skills? Like, was it through your part-time job, or was it through, a project work in university or volunteering and things like that? So always backing up whatever you say with evidence. That's really important as well. Proofread. So you'll be surprised how many applications actually have spelling errors, grammar errors, sometimes just, sentences that don't really feel like they make sense or, aren't relevant. So always proofreading. And always get a friend, or, you know, at least one friend, I would say, to check over as well, just to get a bit of a second opinion. And sometimes a fresh set of eyes can help as well. And always keep a coffee as well, because sometimes you apply for jobs and then all of a sudden you get invited for an interview and you try and find the job ad and it's gone. So make sure that you always save a copy of exactly what you've written, and ideally the job ad as well, because then you can always refer back to it as well before you have your interview, so you can properly prepare. Um, so these are a few quotes from the Graduate Careers Australia Employer Survey. So directly feedback from employers. So these are some of the quotes that they've said about what makes a graduate application outstanding. So obviously, when you're applying for graduate roles, there are going to be other graduates that are interested. You know, some job ads might have a lot of applications, you know, potentially a couple of hundred applications. So I guess what you've got to think is, you know, what do you have that is going to make you stand out from every other person that has the same degree as you or a similar degree? So these are some of the feedback we have from employers. So the first one is understanding requirements and organisation and demonstrates a cultural fit. And so what I kind of take from that is making sure that the roles that you are applying for are firstly relevant and of interest to you, and that you clearly demonstrate that back to the employer. So, you know, why are you actually interested? So it comes back to that motivation piece. And the second one here is clearly demonstrates relevant skills and experiences, application tailored for a particular role. So again, the same kind of theme. And the third one is clear, effective communicator. And so I guess, you know, communication would be in the form of the written letter, and also the resume, obviously. So making sure, again, no errors, but also any communication that you have outside of your application as well. So, for example, if you did make a call to the employer, making sure that that's a good impression as well. You know, showing, if you do decide to do that, it often shows that you've been proactive, which can often make you stand out as well from other candidates if you're a clear communicator, and you've got good verbal communication. And I guess that's something that we could practice in an appointment if you want to work on that as well. So I know that that is often quite a daunting task. And this is what employers are saying that they refer to as inferior applications. So inferior graduates don't do their homework on the organisation and can't demonstrate how they're a good fit. So what we see a lot in cover letters and other applications is students address what the company's asked for. So, for example, the company might list a number of values that they have, and often the students might say, "Oh, you know, these are my values too, and therefore they align with your values." And that's all well and good, but you know, you need a bit more detail than that, because if you think of it like that, you know, other students are probably doing exactly the same thing. So what makes you different, and how can you relate the values that you have back to the evidence of what you've done in the past? So again, relating back to any other experiences that you have that might be different. And the second one here is not attaching a cover letter or following application instructions. And the third is a generic and impersonal cover letter not addressed to the reviewer. So sometimes what people do, and this is really common, so don't worry if you do this, but is send out the same cover letter over and over to all the different employers, because it's quicker. Obviously, it's quicker. And I guess, you know, you might want to apply across more employers. I've got to say that, you know, quality is over quantity when it comes to applications. So even if you are applying for a lot of applications, you know, it's still better to do it tailored. So I would actually prefer to take some time, you know, properly research what the company's about and how your values align with theirs, how your skills intertwine with what they're asking for. and what evidence you can provide, because that's going to be so much stronger than all the people that are applying with a generic cover letter. And, some people say, oh, I don't think the employers will notice. Well, they do. So that's what I tell you as well, that it's really, really important. So just to tailor everything that you write. So we'll go into a bit more detail about that. So, making sure that you read all the documents that are provided to you. The kind of research that you can do is on the company website, and also social media as well. So actually on LinkedIn, it's really a great way to research who works there, what are their values, what kind of jobs have they had there in the past. And sometimes it's actually interesting to find alumni who have actually graduated at Griffith Uni. And then you can see, there's a few people that have actually studied at Griffith that now work at the company that you're interested in. And this is some really great information to know, because you know that the company have hired Griffith graduates in the past. So that means, they might be likely to hire Griffith graduates again. So all these kind of things are good part of research. So we're just going to go into a little bit more detail about that. So I guess when you're thinking about your cover letter, these are some areas that you might want to focus on. And this is a bit of an activity that, can help some people. Some people don't do this activity, and that's fine as well. But if this might help, basically what we have here is an example of a position description and some of the things that they're asking for. So some of the skills or some of the selection criteria that has been asked here. And what we've done is highlight the relevant knowledge and skills that are being asked for in blue, the values in green, and the role duties in red. And so some students kind of like to go through this with, it might be a highlighter, or it might be, something like that, just to see, all right, well, how am I going to break this down first before I write my application? And this is a bit more about a specific job as well. So you can see here in this example, you've got all the highlighted there as well. So we're actually going to provide you with these slides as well. So don't worry about trying to write any of this down at the moment. They'll be emailed out to you as well. So this is one way that you can do it, and one strategy. And I guess for me personally, although I don't use this exact strategy, I do something similar. So if I'm applying for a job, what I do is cut and paste, I guess, all the selection criteria into my cover letter first. And then I've got a bit of a base for a cover letter, but what I do is actually start to intertwine these words plus examples in. And then you can kind of see where the gaps are. So if there's any other skills that do need to be addressed, you can slowly add them in. So that's sometimes a good way to do it too. So I guess whichever way suits you. Here's a bit more detail on that. And then they've also got an example of graduate nurse. So I guess, if you wanted to do this as a bit of an activity before you do go down the path of starting to apply, you could potentially look at this and just go, all right, so which are the keywords that actually jump out to you? Because the keywords that jump out to you are probably going to be the ones that are jumping out to recruiters from reading your resume as well. So I would keep that in mind too. So then obviously a nice picture of the cake. So I guess this is also important to think about too. So organizational fit. And so we mentioned a little bit before about values and how that relates to you as a person. And I guess, if there is an organization such as a hospital and you're applying for this kind of graduate nurse position, these are their top 5 values that they're looking for. And so if they mention this, within their job ad, and they, you go to information sessions, you notice that they keep mentioning these values, I would say it's pretty important to reflect that back when you're writing your job application. Again, not just reflecting it back without adding anything else, but thinking about, okay, well, which ones of these values do I actually connect with the most? So it might be looking here, respecting others and valuing diversity. So, for example, in the past, you might have worked with people from diverse cultures, or, maybe provide an example of your volunteering work, because that will kind of feed directly into there. And I guess when you are providing your examples, always try and think of the most relevant examples that you can. So if it was a graduate nurse position, has there been any other times where you've worked directly one-on-one with patients or people in general, or any customer service type work? Because obviously that's all directly related, even if it has been in another industry. So even if you do have, a few part-time jobs or casual work that you feel like is not related to your profession, the good news is that employers actually still really appreciate and value this kind of experience as well. And this is often where you can get some really good examples for your key selection criteria and for your cover letter as well. Not sure if I have any questions yet, but if you wanted to, feel free to just type as you think of them into the chat as well. And so I guess the next stage here is, we're thinking a bit deeper here as well. So these are the kind of things that they've asked for in the job ad. So say it's high performance, connection, clarity, respect, capability. These are some other phrases that you might want to consider as well. So I guess, connection, so patient care, teamwork. So these are, I guess, if the front skills here are the macro skills, then we're also looking at the micro skills as well. So what other skills come of that, and how can you get a bit more specific about your examples? So here for respect, asking for inclusivity and sensitivity, you might want to provide an example of when you have, handle confidential information, for example, because obviously in this case, it would directly relate to the kind of work that you would and the kind of skills you'd be using as a graduate nurse. So always trying to link it back. So this is just a bit of a table that can give you some information on that as well. So thinking about, if you do have a main competency, so they might say, address these competencies within your key selection criteria. And one of them might be builds enduring relationships. So if you think of that a bit further, think about where you've built relationships the most. So whether it be in your work, volunteering, at uni, anything else that you've done, it might be like a sports club or a social club. And think about specific examples of how you've developed those skills. So here we've got communicates in a clear, succinct and deliberate manner, resonates with different stakeholders. So you might want to think of an example of where and when you've actually built a relationship with a particular stakeholder. So I guess in the key selection criteria, you want to be as specific as you can, obviously without, going into anything that's confidential, but as detailed as you can. The examples are always going to be more interesting. And I guess think of it a bit about, if it's your own story, employers kind of want to hear what your story is, and, that personal touch that we were talking about before as well. So we're just going through a few goals here. So using evidence, providing specific details of when, where, and how you've implied that skill in the past. Also indicating how your values align with theirs. So as we said, how, so with that evidence, and where possible, include an indicator of success, such as exceeding key performance indicators. So for example, if you have worked at McDonald's, somewhere like that, perhaps you were promoted to crew trainer, and as a result, you got, awarded for customer service award, or maybe had that responsibility of obviously training staff members and doing the rosters, and any of those kind of higher level responsibilities are really great examples of, obviously, you're obviously a good worker, And those kind of examples employers are really interested in. Some other examples might actually be verbal feedback. So sometimes you might get great feedback from a customer. So the customer might say, "Oh, thanks very much. Really enjoyed our conversation, and thank you for your time." And obviously, hopefully, more detail than that. But then you might want to write that you've received that positive feedback from customers, and sometimes even people write about feedback that they've received from their managers or any supervisors. So that's all indicators of success as well. So it doesn't necessarily have to be something that is numbered or measurable. It could just be, a story of how you've achieved something within your workplace in the past. So we've just given a bit of a list here of different places that your experience can come from. And so obviously not everyone will have all of these, but just have a look at the list and start to think about what you have done in the past. And, if you're at the start of your degree, or, even if you're at the end of your degree, thinking about where you might be able to build on. If you're towards the beginning of your degree, you'll obviously still have time to get involved with any potential exchange and things like that. Thinking about any placements that you can do as part of your course, any volunteering. So again, things that other students might not be doing. And obviously it depends on how much time you've got in the day, because, obviously everyone's busy. And even if it is volunteering, once a month, or it's just attending some events for your professional association, any of that kind of stuff, evidence can always come from those things. So I guess think about ways that you can boost your resume and your experience, because that will help you both, know what you're going to be interested in and what you like, what you don't like. But it can also boost your resume and your examples and the bank of examples that you can use for cover letters in the future. On that too, I'd probably recommend to start thinking about adding any examples that you think of to a specific Word doc or something like that. I've got an example in a few slides of how you can do that as well, and an actual template that if you wanted to use that or create your own, and just to kind of add to that bank, because over the years you'll probably start to forget a few of these examples of what you've actually achieved and what you've done, and you don't want to lose that. So I would usually have a whole Word doc of just skills you've acquired, how you've acquired them, things like that, because then you can draw on these for any of the applications that you apply for in the future. So before we get into how to write it, so these are some helpful strategies, and I guess have a look through those. As I've said before, creating a narrative can be really useful. So making sure that you explain exactly why you're interested and what is your particular story. Like why are you here? Why are you studying here? Why are you studying what you're studying? And why are you now applying for this particular organization? And, so sometimes I ask people this question and they say, "Oh, well, I need the money," which, fair enough. Everyone needs the money as well. But what else? I mean, I'm sure that there was some other reason that might be interesting for employers to read. So it might be something like, you've had previous exposure to it in the past. It might be that, a family member was doing it, that's how you heard about it. It might be that you've done some self-learning, like some short courses or some TAFE originally to get into it. Whatever motivation you have, make sure to cover that. So this is, I would say, one of the first steps would be to start to track your skills. And this is one of the spreadsheets that I was talking about before. So these are some of the most common personal and professional skills that might be asked. And they're not always written like this. So I guess keep that in mind. These are quite broad skills. And what you might want to do is start to add your own. So whenever you're looking at job ads for your particular profession, having a look and seeing, all right, what are the most common skills that are being asked for me? And start to put this in your own table. And then starting to think about specific examples of how you've acquired those skills. So It might be academic study. So as I said, through project work or anything like that. It might be through work experience, or it might be any extracurricular activities. So these are kind of the three broad categories. And then I would just start to add in specific examples into those over time. And what you might end up having is a lot of examples to draw from, which is really ideal. Because when you go for an interview, once you get to that stage, obviously this is all trying to get you to an interview. You want to have those examples ready to go to speak about as well. So this actually really comes in handy at that point too, because you might have written about it and you've got to the interview, but then it's like, okay, I need more detail and I need to kind of practice it out loud. And this is going to be helpful for that stage as well. So feel free to create your own if you don't like the look of that one, but something along those lines I think would really help. And this is just kind of going through a few examples here. And what I just wanted to highlight here is, so thinking about your own career story. So making it your own story and making it interesting to read. So I guess, put yourself in the shoes of an employer. Especially if they've been at that organisation for a while, or it's their own business, or it's a small business. They're probably very invested in what they do, and they really want the right fit and the right person to come into their organisation. So I guess put yourself into their shoes and think, if I was on the other side hiring, what kind of person would I be interested in, and what kind of skills and examples would I want to hear in this case? What's going to be different to other people? So as I said here, it says, put your feelings to the front. So I always say it's okay to be a little bit human and a bit personal, because I guess in these letters, sometimes they come across as very formal, which is good, but formal, but also personal is good. So it's kind of looking for that balance there. And also make sure that you embrace a bit of intrigue as well. So I guess getting the listener to lean forward, or if they're reading something, getting them to keep reading. So if you start your story with something interesting, as it says here, any stories about overcoming adversity and things like that, that's always really great. And I guess, obviously it depends on what kind of story that is. But if you're not sure about certain stories to share, we're happy to talk that through in appointments with you as well. Because sometimes I guess there's a bit of a fine line, isn't there? So what we're going to do now is just go through what do you actually put in your application. So there's 4 parts to a cover letter, and, sometimes 5. So I guess if you focus on 4 or 5 paragraphs, that's usually about a good length. So think about your reason for the letter and present your own circumstances, matching the advertisement and what is actually required, indicating your interest and why this organisation and support your interest, and any closing remarks. So thank you for your time. I'm looking forward to hearing from you at your convenience, and your personal details. So don't forget to put your personal details so they can actually contact you and know how to contact you. So in a nutshell, that they're the most important things to put into your cover letter. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter too much what order it is. But as I said before, just thinking about, the intrigue of the reader. So if something seems to be really prominent in their selection criteria, so for example, if they've written the same thing over and over, for example, the word passionate, or, a certain skill that they're looking for, I would make sure to have those things towards the top of your cover letter, so that straight away it grabs their attention and they go, oh, okay, this person has actually addressed straight away what we're really wanting. So go through a few cover letter essentials. And so personally addressed, so ideally you would have it addressed to a certain contact person. And I know that it's not always possible, but sometimes you have to do a little bit of digging to find out if there is somebody that you can personally address it to. Sometimes that can make all the difference. So like I said before, if you can have if you call even their HR department and you find out, okay, can you please advise who I can address my cover letter to? You might even get a chance to speak to the recruiter about the job. And then you can actually ask some questions. And then you can say, oh, this sounds like a great opportunity. I'm just going to submit my application now. And then all of a sudden, the recruiter remembers you, they've spoken to you. And then in the cover letter, you can say, it was nice to speak to you just now. So that's a good little thing to do if you can get onto them, of course. And what else? One page. So as I said, ideally one page unless asked otherwise. So often in certain degrees and disciplines and certain organisations, they might want a 2-page key selection criteria document, or they might say something like address the key capabilities within 2 pages. And obviously, if that's the case, just do whatever is required. So whatever the instructions are, just make sure you follow those. And if they don't say, then I would say 1 page is safe. And what else? We've already been through that. So making sure you indicate your interest, positive. And this is a bit of a, I guess, a bit of a template you can practice with as well. So obviously you wouldn't submit with the lines and everything like with the questions. But if you're at the point where you're just deciding, what am I actually going to put in my cover letter, and you want to do some brainstorming, then this can be really good. So you can start to think about, paragraph 1, this is what I'm going to write about, paragraph 2, 3, 4. And then you can start to fill in the details. And then what you just do is to move that across to paragraph form into a Word doc. So if you are in those initial stages, feel free to use this. And I guess, the one thing in the first paragraph is making sure that why you're applying. That's often really important at the start, because that is a way that you will get the interest straight away. Key selection criteria. Okay, so do I have any questions about cover letters before we move on to key selection criteria? I can't see anything in the chat, but even if you wanted to ask it off mute, feel free.
What do you think about using ChatGPT to write a cover letter?
Good question. Yeah, I was actually asked that question yesterday in an appointment as well. It's a very common question. Well, I guess that's fine to a certain point. So I was speaking to a student yesterday, and they said they actually cut and paste the job ad into ChatGPT, and then they also put their resume in, and then they said to ChatGPT, "Can you create a cover letter for me which addresses the key selection criteria and my resume?" So they actually got it to combine the two, and that's okay to do. I guess just make sure that after that you do check over it and you make sure it sounds like you, because as I said before, a cover letter is often about your motivations and why you actually want to get into that company, and the things that are going to set you apart. Like that stuff is often not in your job, like in your resume. So if ChatGPT is just reading your resume, they're going to miss those personal details. So I guess you could use it as an initial thing, but then afterwards you'd probably have to go through and make sure, one, it's in the language that you would actually write in, and then 2, actually making sure that all the motivations are addressed and everything like that. And I will say too that it's usually pretty obvious if someone has done a cover letter with ChatGPT, because I've done a lot of cover letter reviews and usually can tell when it has been that. So keep that in mind too, that employers are probably going to know. And employees know that students do use it. Yes, so got some more. So, okay, Carolyn. Okay, thank you, Justin. Justin's answering some questions. Yeah, cool. All right, thank you. Was there any other things that we wanted to ask about cover letters? Will knowing about ChatGPT affect my chances at employment? Will knowing about, so do you mean will it affect if the employer does know that you have used ChatGPT? Yes. Not normally, no. I guess it depends on the employer. Some employers might be against it potentially, so I guess there is that risk. That being said, some employers might not even notice that you have used it. I personally notice because I've read a lot of them, and some employers probably do also read a lot of applications. At the end of the day, it's up to you if you want to just use it maybe in the initial stage and then see how it comes out, and if you're happy with it or not, probably get us to check over it too and see if it sounds okay. Sometimes it doesn't quite make sense either. Okay, so moving on to selection criteria. Um, so selection criteria. So I guess these are the overall categories. So we've got qualifications, experience, knowledge, skills, abilities. So these are very broad terms that, and usually kind of like little subheadings that might be required in the key selection criteria. Is okay, so commonly used key selection criteria phrases. So these might be some of the things that you're hearing. So what you have an awareness of, an understanding of, ability to, or experience in. So sometimes this is a little bit confusing, I guess, because awareness of, understanding of, and ability, they can really all be drawn from university studies or other stuff that you've done. Experience in sometimes is a bit more particular. So they might say experience in this particular industry. The other one they often say is relevant experience, which is a very broad term as well. And I guess it depends on, how relevant your experience has been, if you feel like you can talk about that. One thing that I will say is if you have done any relevant internships or placements as part of your course, that is actually relevant experience, I would say. And so I would add that to your overall tally of, if they are asking for, say, 2 years of relevant experience. I guess it depends on how it's worded. And this is stuff that we can help with as well. So with key selection criteria, so you want to make sure that you use the STAR technique. And does everyone know what the STAR technique is, or would you like me to explain that a bit further? Whoops. All good. Thank you. Cool. All right. So yeah, basically with the STAR technique, you want to make sure that you are providing a specific example of what you've done in the past. So it's often for behavioral type questions. So things like, can you tell me about a time where you've done this, in an interview format? However, in a key selection criteria response format, it's often something like this. So it might be excellent communication skills and ability to work collaborative with sorry, I can't say that word. Work with other stakeholders. And this is a kind of example that you might want to use. So 2 years of experience as a receptionist, so you overall give a bit of an overview of what you're going to speak about. So you're reflecting back the question first, and then you go into a specific example. This was one particular example, or this was on one occasion, and things like that. So you want to be really specific with your examples. So you want to make sure that you're within the STAR response, the most important sections are actually the actions and the results. So as in that particular example, what did you personally do and how did you do it? And also what result was it and what positive feedback did you get? And another one onto that is what you learnt. So these are really important. So obviously you've got to set the scene first. Where were you? What were you doing? What tasks were you doing? And then going to the actions and results as well. So learning the STAR format is really important for both this and also interviews as well, because whenever you're asked a behavioural interview questions, tell me a time when, this is when you would go into STAR mode. And so what you want to do is have a really clear example, specific example, but you also want to make sure that it's really succinct and it's really interesting, as we said before, interesting to read, and ideally something that is quite relevant as well to what they're asking for, as relevant as you can. Obviously, sometimes you might be going from something completely different, but just always thinking about, what's the most relevant example that you do have. And so what we've got here is, again, a few highlights into what is the STAR and kind of breaking that down. So you can use these examples as a bit of a base for, all right, so what am I supposed to put in the next sentence, this kind of thing. Obviously, it'll be your own personal examples. So just making sure that you do start each criterion with a really strong statement, and then you go into that example. So always reflecting back, then the example. So avoid saying things like I can or I believe and things like that. Instead, the STAR is actually specific evidence and example of what you have done. You don't need to write I believe statements, because employers will make their decision for themselves on the information that they have. So I guess, again, as with the cover letters, you don't want to draw on anything that might be a little bit negative, or if you're questioning your own abilities or things like that. People want to read things that are really definite, and you're really confident that this is what you've done in the past, and therefore this is why I can do it again in the future, kind of thing. And so there's a bit of information here about personal or suitability statement. And this, again, is often a lot of the same kind of stuff that you would have had in the cover letter. But often, sometimes in a suitability statement, they might actually say to address in the STAR format, and they might actually give a range. So as we said before, they might even say a word range, word limit, and they might say how many pages to do it in. So thinking about, again, what skills and values that you have that best match up with what they're asking for. Okay, so right. So I guess that's the end of the kind of the content section. I'm going to explain a bit about what other services we have and go into a bit more of detail about that in the last 5 minutes, and then we'll have about 5 minutes for questions. So if you do have any other questions while we're waiting, feel free to just write them in the chat, and then we can go through them in a sec. So I mentioned this before, so you could, if you wanted to discuss all this further and you wanted to get your cover letter or your key selection criteria reviewed, feel free to book a confidential careers appointment with one of us through Career Hub. And we also can help with all of these other things. So have a read through, and I'll just touch on a few of our other services as well. So this is actually, if you want to go through the link, the booking link of how to find us in there. We've also got a lot of careers and employment resources on our SharePoint site. So have a look. So this is, these are some of the topics, obviously written applications, but we've also got heaps of other topics on there as well. And Career Hub. So obviously you booked Career Hub for this event, so that's a good start. So some students don't know, though, that we actually have jobs on Career Hub as well. So we have jobs, casual, part-time, because employers are actually looking for Griffith students, and that's why they decide to post on Career Hub. So that's also why it's good to look for a job on Career Hub, sometimes, as well as, obviously Seek and all those ones, which are more open to everybody, whereas these ones are specifically for students. And also we've got events and things like that on there too. So we've got an upcoming Careers Expo as well at the Gold Coast campus on the 1st of August. So things like that you can find on there, and you can actually book into those too, those physical ones. And we actually have a careers and employment recruitment team here, and we've got 4 dedicated staff who are placing students into roles. So the roles are both on campus and off campus. So all you need to do for that is to firstly get your resume up to date, and then you apply or you register through the portal, and then you let them know what kind of work that you're looking for. and then they can contact you. They'll email you whenever opportunities arise. Okay. And then we've got the industry mentoring program. So the industry mentoring program is available to students, and basically what you have is a 12-week program where you're matched with an industry professional. So it might be someone that's in your field, and you can have a look at their profiles and you can choose who you want to be matched with. And then over those 12 weeks, you only have to meet or speak to them a minimum of 6 hours. And then over that time, you can ask them questions like, what's it like in your career day to day? Can you, what do you like about your career? What don't you like? And things like that. And often it's just a great way to find out a bit more about maybe the sector that you might be considering. And also sometimes the kind of company that they work for, you might want to ask questions about what it's like to work there, things like that. It's definitely not about asking for a job, but it's a good way to connect with professionals that might be in your field. Yes, so here's the information about the careers fair. So 11 till 2 on the 1st of August. So what we've got here is the website as well. And so through the website, you can actually find what employers are actually going to be attending, and you can see what disciplines that each employers take. So it might be worth having a look on there, researching them first, and then coming along and having a chat to them too. And launch your career. So obviously we're doing that now. There's other sessions too. Elevate your career is coming up, I believe, next week. Is that right, Justin? Are you still there, Justin? Yeah, I think that's next week. We've got a few sessions on things like LinkedIn and things like that. So have a look and see if there's anything of interest. And we've also got a series of international student careers workshops as well. So some of them are going to be webinars and some of them are face-to-face both at the Gold Coast and the Nathan campuses. So come along if you're an international student and we can discuss, a variety of topics. So what you can do is actually have a look through the QR code, and then you could also filter on Career Hub for webinars for events, and then for international students, we've got a separate tab for you as well with specific events for you. Resumes. So obviously resumes are important to go along with the key selection criteria and your cover letters. So more information is there. Interview skills. Interview skills, obviously very important to practice. So we've got a free service called the Big Interview, where you can actually sign in for free as a Griffith student and use that program, and you can actually watch yourself back when you're doing interviews, which is good. And I guess, especially if you're going for something, an interview that's online or something like that, it's good to practice those skills. And you can actually choose the kind of interviewer you have. So as in, nice interviewer or not. So that's a really good way to practice too, a range of different questions that you might be asked and things like that. And then we have, student feedback. So if you'd like to provide any student feedback, feel free to through this code. So feel free to do it now if you like. And while we're doing that, does anyone else have any questions before we finish up for today?